Tonight on Inside Story, it's a nightmare.
There was a bang and a shudder.
There was this moment of panic.
6 hours of absolute mayhem.
I think we all knew that the ship was sinking.
Guys in their 20s were just pushing elderly people aside to try and get to a lifeboat.
More than 4,000 desperate people abandoned.
And the lifeboat went crashing into the side of the boat.
Left to drown by an incompetent coward who deserted his sinking ship.
He gets to walk away while people lost their lives because of his stupidity.
Hello, I'm Layla McKinnon. Welcome to Inside Story. The night of January 13th, 2012, the Costa Concordia is cruising the Mediterranean. It's carefree, romantic, with fine food, wine and lots of fun, all very Italian. Then there's a sickening crash. The lights go out, the ship shudders, plates, glasses, bottles fly everywhere. And then the lies begin. Even as the liner starts to sink, terrified passengers are told to stay calm. There's nothing to worry about. Among them, 23 Australians, all of them fighting for their lives.
There was this terrible noise. The ship spun and everything flew through the air. The kids were thrown on the ground.
And all of a sudden, there was a bang and a shudder.
It was bump, 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 and then bang, and then the TV and everything in the room fell off the shelves.
And I remember my husband saying, oh, look, I think he's just thrown it into reverse or something. It's no big deal, don't worry about it.
I said to Rob, what's going to happen? And he said, Trace, it's not like the Titanic. We're not going to sink.
I ate my words, didn't I?
The crash happened at 9:42. The ship is filling up with water. There has been a blackout. There are scenes of mass panic. And Captain Scatino was like a deer in the headlights. He seemed to fail to understand the full capacity of what was going on.
Electrical fault with one of the generators, but the situation is under control and our technicians are aiming to rectify the situation at this time, so please remain calm.
The blatant lies that were told on that night make me angry, make me embarrassed to be a human being.
32 people died, and I just think that's an incredible tragedy. Those people didn't have to die. I'm Sharon Berkveld, and I was one of the Australian passengers on board the Costa Concordia when it sank. This is our story. The cruise, to be honest, was fantastic. We went to Majorca, we went to Sardinia, Barcelona, we went to Rome. It's basically the inside of the Italian boot. I was travelling with my husband at the time and our 4 children who were aged between 16 and 10. And we found that as a family, travelling with 4 children was easy. It was flexibility and it was peace. You know, holidays are about peace and quiet.
We'd had a fairly rough time the past 18 months with our marriage, and it was just solidify our marriage, get our marriage back together.
We got on in Rome and the cruise liner was travelling around on a 7-day loop. So, yeah, a bit romantic and definitely a good thing to do.
I love cruises, particularly in the Mediterranean, because you go to sleep in one country and make up in another one. You don't have to repack your suitcase every night, and you meet a lot of great people.
The captain of the ship is called Francesco Scatino. He's in his early 50s, he's married. He's a very dashing figure. He has a permanent tan, he's got a full head of silky black hair. He was the king of the ship, if you like, and he portrayed that role, I think, very effectively. On the night the accident happened, Captain Scatino was dining with this blonde woman from Moldova, Dominika Chermitan. He wined and dined her, he took her up to the bridge, and it seemed that he was wanting to show off when he invited her up there as he was doing this salute, this sail past the island of Giglio, trying to make an impression. There seems to be this tradition around the Mediterranean where a cruise ship will deviate from its sailing route to move a little bit closer to shore to do a greeting, a sail past, a salute to people on shore.
We were at dinner. It was the 8:30 session. I think we'd just finished entrees. And it's an Italian cruise ship, so it's alive, you know, and there's pasta and plates and, you know, it's full of activity.
I was deciding whether to go and watch the show that was about to start at 9 o'clock and decided not to.
We'd had a magnificent meal. We were pretty tired, and I was thinking of going to sleep. And all of a sudden, there was a bang and a shudder. And I looked at Trace and I said, "We've just run aground." And she said, "You sure? Really?" I said, "Yep."
Plates came crashing down, all the waiters were falling over. The lovely smell of balsamic vinegar bottles crashing all over the floor, as you do with Italian cruise liners. And a lot of people came running out of the restaurant screaming and panicking, and we're just like, oh yeah, you know, what are they worried about?
It was very scary, and I think one of us probably said, because we do have a bit of a sense of humour, well, that's the end of dinner.
They were about 2 nautical miles off the coast of Giglio at this point. And Captain Scatino knew there were rocks there, but he didn't realise how close he was. The ship was travelling very fast at about 15 knots. Suddenly, the ship hit the rock and Scatino panicked, and we hear him ordering to starboard. Then we hear him again saying to port. So there was this moment of panic where he knew that he'd hit the rock and he wasn't quite sure how he was going to get out of it. Almost immediately, his chief engineer was telling him the compartments of the engine room were filling up with water. Really, very early on, they were saying, we've lost control of the ship.
We're currently in a blackout as we've experienced electrical failure.
And then the first message came over saying that it was an electrical fault and could we please go back to our cabins? So we did what we were told.
But the situation is under control and our technicians are aiming to rectify the situation at this time. So please remain calm and we'll keep you informed as we have more news to inform you. Thank you for your attention.
On board the Costa Concordia, it's pandemonium. Every man, woman and child for themselves. Captain Scatino, so suave with the ladies, so dashing in his uniform, is hopelessly inept. And his lies become even more monstrous. Now he's not only lying to himself, his passengers and crew, he's blatantly trying to hide the terrible truth from the Coast Guard, a lie with disastrous consequences.
Everything was in chaos. Everything was upside down. The lights weren't on permanently. It was flashing on and off. So there were moments of just complete darkness.
The ceiling became the floor became the ceiling. The electricity went out. People were trapped in corridors and were completely disoriented.
Messages kept coming over the radio.
Please remain calm and we'll keep you informed as we have more news to inform you. Thank you for your attention.
Saying, you know, it's just electrical fault, we'll be fine, everything will be fine, just stay where you are.
The situation is under control and our technicians are aiming to rectify the situation at this time.
And other messages were coming over, but they were in codes, like numbers.
Tango India, Lifeboat, number 3.
We knew straight away that it wasn't an electrical problem, it was way more than that. Robert didn't want to get the life jackets on, and I said, no, we're taking the life jackets, we're going up to the deck. When we got upstairs, they were telling us to go back downstairs to our rooms, and they were telling everyone not to panic and to go back down.
Un annuncio a nome del nostro comandante. Le chiediamo gentilmente di tornare alla vostra cabina o se desiderate essere in giro por il salone. Se desiderate rimanere qui in piedi va bene pure, ma io vi chiedo gentilmente di andare in camera e essere tranquilli seduti.
It was packed. If you can imagine, like, you've got 4 or 5 foot of deck and there's 2,000 people either side.
It was just people everywhere, people screaming, people crying, people running around looking for people. You know, I can't find my husband, I can't find my daughter, I can't find this person, screaming and yelling and trying to get onto the lifeboats. Everybody was pushing to try and get onto the lifeboats, and the guys were saying, no, captain's got to give the order before we can get onto the lifeboat. You can't get on yet. It was just total bedlam.
Normally when a ship is in distress, the ship contacts the Coast Guard.
Buonasera, Porta Concordia. Cortesemente, avete dei problemi a bordo voi? Abbiamo un blackout a bordo e stiamo verificando le condizioni. Se necessità di assistenza, i carabinieri di Prato hanno ricevuto una telefonata di un parente di un marittimo che diceva durante il pranzo gli è cascato tutto in testa. Abbiamo un blackout e stiamo verificando le condizioni a bordo.
The officer didn't believe that. He didn't accept that answer. He notified his superiors. At that point, no emergency had been declared. There was chaos on the bridge. The clock is ticking. Every moment counts at this point. The crew is demanding that the captain make a decision. Meanwhile, up above, the passengers are in total panic.
Guys in their 20s, even early 30s, were just pushing elderly people aside to try and get to a lifeboat. And we weren't allowed to get into the lifeboats at that stage. We gathered a group of probably 150 to 200 people in a walkway, and I was motioning to take deep breaths and just think about the good things. And we were actually holding a couple of the elderly ones up because they were very panicked and shaken. They thought it was the end for them.
I think we all knew that the ship was sinking, and I think the anger was mounting. Anger, the confusion, the frustration. It seemed almost instant between the last announcement of this is just an electrical fault, we'll be on our way soon, and then within moments there was this abandoned ship. That was very frightening, very frightening.
As soon as it started to tilt faster, that's when the panic really started to set in. So people started jumping into the water, which was quite scary as well. They were jumping.
A lot of people didn't know what to do or where to go. There was a young girl who was, I later found out, was 5 years old, her and her father. He was saying he had to go back to his room. We were constantly saying, no, do not go back to your room.
Her dad went back to his cabin to get medication, and then we found out that they didn't survive. That's a really hard thing to deal with.
8 weeks after we arrived home, I started having nightmares and seeing this 5-year-old girl in my sleep. She'd be looking at me and pleading with me to help her. And I'd wake up and I got too scared to go back to sleep.
And we were on the low side of the boat, and that was the place to be because the lifeboats on the high side couldn't actually get down.
By the time we got onto the lifeboat, all of the seats were full and there was probably about 50 people standing before we even got on. People just kept piling on and piling on and piling on. It was like a sardine can. They decided they'd start letting the boat down. So we came down probably a deck and the lifeboat went crashing into the side of the boat. And that's when we all fell over. People were almost falling out the side of the boat. I had heel marks all over me where people had fallen over. It was just crazy, and they just had to keep pushing and pushing it because the boat's sort of tipping further and further. We finally hit the water and everybody just cheered.
We had been on the ship a long time after abandoned ship had been called because we were on the second floor lifeboat, so all the ones underneath needed to be released. The only problem was that our lifeboat didn't fall. It stayed where it was. But there was this crew member and he was an amazing man. He climbed up through this manhole and grabbed the emergency tool, which was an axe that had been painted in red, and started hacking away at something and released the boat. And I still get shivers when I think about it. It was terrifying. It just looked like the ship was going to fall on top of us. And I remember just, you know, praying that we could just get past it before it fell.
By now, the Costa Concordia is beyond hope, a helpless giant sinking into the sea. Through perseverance, bravery and sheer good luck, most of the passengers have escaped in the lifeboats. But hundreds more are still trapped on board, and there's yet another act of bastardry from the captain still to come.
The ship is filling up with water. There has been a blackout. There are scenes of mass panic. And Captain Scatino failed to notify the Coast Guard. He seemed to be paralysed and he seemed to be having telephone conversations with someone on shore instead of actually trying to do everything possible to save the 4,200 people that were on his ship.
It just makes you so furious. I mean, he made the decision. He wanted to go close to that island. And he put all of our lives at risk just for his, you know, little show of bravado.
Captain Scatino not only crashed the ship, but got off the ship as quickly as possible. Scatino had the wherewithal to go back to his cabin, change his clothes, and we see him on the edge of the ship about to get into a lifeboat. He later said he slipped into a lifeboat, but we see him getting into a lifeboat as hundreds of people are still trapped on board.
Pronto? Sì, sono De Falco da Livorno, comandante. Sì, comandante, si guarda. Ascolti, Schettino. Ci sono persone intrappolate a bordo. Adesso lei va con la sua scialuppa nave e mi dice quante persone e che cosa hanno a bordo, chiaro?
The Coast Guard themselves, the officers, were gobsmacked. They couldn't believe, they still can't believe, that a captain would desert the passengers and the crew of his own ship as it was sinking.
Lei vada a bordo, è un ordine. Lei non deve fare altre valutazioni. Lei ha dichiarato l'abbandono nave. C'ho dei cadaveri, Schettino. Avanti. Ma si rende conto che è buio e che qua non vediamo... E che vuole tornare a casa, Schettino? È buio, vuole tornare a casa? Salga sulla prua della nave tramite la biscacina e mi dica cosa si può fare, quante persone ci sono e che bisogno hanno. Ora!
We were on a lifeboat to the island. I saw a bloke standing up on the rocks, yelling into a phone. And I thought to myself, is that the captain? It looks like the captain. And I'm thinking, why is he off this boat? Why isn't he there? It's an unwritten rule. You go down with the ship.
Scatino was basically sitting on the rocks on shore and watched the ship sink.
Vai a sinistra, sinistra. Vai, vai.
Vai, 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 vai.
The helicopter pilots were searching in the dark for this vessel.
Guarda un po' quale che cos'è? Alberto! No, non era quella, scusa. Più grossa ancora.
When the helicopters arrived, the emergency crew members discovered many, many people trapped on the ship.
Sarà qua dietro, perché...
Sarà là dietro, sì.
È questa!
Guarda dov'è?
Eccola qui!
Picchia affondata!
Porco cane!
One emergency worker told me when he was winched down from the chopper to the ship, he discovered 56 people below the deck. These people were so petrified, they were in such deep shock, they couldn't even speak. He managed to winch all of them off the ship, but during one of those operations, he discovered even more people beneath the ship.
On the top side, there was probably 300 or 400 people left after we got off. Basically, all there was a rope ladder down into lifeboats that were waiting for them on that side. I can only imagine how horrendous that would have been for them.
Some people gave up and dived into the water, started to swim to shore.
You could see people jumping into the sea, especially at this point when the ship was so tilted over.
It was dark, the water was freezing cold as it was the middle of winter, and some people drowned and some people even died of hypothermia because the water was so cold.
By the time we got to shore, there was already a lot of people there.
We saw a guy, it looked as if his fingers had been cut off and he had a towel wrapped around it. And we saw the body in a black bag going into the medical area. There were people with cuts and blood running down their face.
There was a mix of emotion because you'd have this sense of people being incredibly distressed, and then there was this absolutely joyous moment where someone was reunited with someone else. The next thing I recall is the sound of the ship falling into the sea. It was just this terrible sound of something exploding, and metal and just noise, and it was just awful, an awful sound. I'll always remember the sound. It was the end of something.
The search for bodies on board the cruise liner continues for 2 years. The final death toll is 32. Captain Francesco Schettino is found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 16 years jail. But he is still a free man, still lying, still blaming everyone but himself. And the 23 Australian survivors, they're still haunted by their nightmares, their memories of the night the Costa Concordia went down.
Schettino was Italy's most hated man. He was like this symbol of everything that was wrong with Italy. His hubris, his arrogance, his failure to acknowledge what he'd done, the fact that he was not only incompetent but then tried to lie about it.
And there is a difference between crime and accident. In this case, it's been treated like a crime. I don't understand why.
It was negligence, and it was gross negligence, and negligence isn't an accident. Negligence is a crime.
I cannot feel responsible. Of course, I feel sad for that, but it's something that I can deal with because I know that it's not the truth.
The man seems deluded. He still has no concept of what has happened. He has blamed everyone possible except himself. He's blamed the helmsman, he's blamed Costa Cruises for what he considers to be shoddy equipment or the engine room that wasn't functioning. You name it, he's come up with a million excuses. The buck has to stop somewhere. The buck has to stop with Schettino.
Comandante! Comandante!
He's not in any jail and he gets to stay home until everybody finishes all their appeals, which could take another 10 years. He gets to walk away while lots of other people lost their lives because of his stupidity.
We talk about the people who died, the people who were injured, but Several thousand people were on that ship. It's just impossible to imagine the kind of trauma that an experience like that leaves you with.
I had terrible nightmares, yeah. Mostly about getting off the boat when the water was coming up. But Robert's dreams were more dramatic. His dreams were about the child that actually drowned.
I'd see this 5-year-old girl in my dreams, and that led to sleep deprivation, which led to anxiety, depression. They would eventually diagnose me with post-traumatic stress disorder of a chronic stage. They put me on medication, very heavy medication. I had to give up work.
We were both at the point where we were wanting to commit suicide. So, yeah, it was really not a good point to be at in our lives, yeah.
Often we think the survivor's lucky to have escaped with their lives and they should be grateful for that, but the psychological, emotional impact can never be underestimated. And it's not uncommon for people to be haunted by things that they did or that they didn't do or that they feel in retrospect that they could have done.
Survivor guilt is a very funny thing. If that little girl could have lived and I could have gone, I would have gladly given myself so she could have had a life. 4 years on, we still have our ups and downs. We still have good days. We still have some very bad days. I don't think I'll ever get over it in my life.